London is not just some city. Its spirit stands outside of time. Certain places have influenced its citizens. It is not only a setting, but a presence, a character in various films, novels, and poems. My name is Philip Röttgers, and I search for London's spirit. I think there are two particular ways to explore the powerful and mysterious place that is London: through literature and through walking. Follow me into a secret world. Follow me to London beyond time and place. In this series, I will explore its spirit by walking the city and talking to London enthusiasts. I invite you to join me. Together, we will discover London beyond time and place. This is Talks Beyond Time and Place. Hello everybody to Talks Beyond Time and Place. My name is Philip Röttgers and my guests today are Vanessa Woolf and George Hoyle of London Dreamtime. Welcome.
Thank you for having us.
Hi.
It's the first time that I have two guests in an episode of Talks Beyond Time and Place, so it is a bit of a premiere for me also. Vanessa and George are professional storytellers, and London Dreamtime is all about storytelling, and much of it is inspired by the history and myth and folklore of London. So maybe we can start by you telling us a bit about your work and London Dreamtime and what you do in general.
Right. So since about 2010, George and I have been roaming around strange corners of London. So George is very good at finding curious, tucked away corners of London that would be interesting and exciting to take people to. And then, so we'll take them there maybe in the middle of the night or something like that. We'll get out our picnic blankets and our lanterns, and we'll all gather around, and George will play songs on the guitar and I will tell them stories. So it's an incredibly lo-fi, low-tech, a very, very kind of simple way of exploring the city and bringing it to life. And very often, both the stories and the songs are inspired by the location itself in some way or other. Sometimes very directly because they're the story that happened there, and sometimes more obliquely, in that something about the place suggests a story or suggests a theme. So it might be like, for example, we told an ancient Egyptian story of kind of old magic near the Crystal Palace Sphinxes. So there's no, it didn't really happen there or anything like that. But because the Sphinxes are there, they're not really ancient Egyptian, they're Victorian, but it still suggested it will be felt right to do it.
I know what you mean.
Yeah, that's right. And so our idea between us is to him with his music and with me with my storytelling is to bring these spaces to life.
Yeah.
What happens is quite often, because we love to walk around the city jointly and severally, is that we'll come across locations. Like there was that time when I went past the docks at Woolwich.
That place is amazing.
Which is it's in a part of London which nobody really necessarily wants to go. It's not a romantic place, but the docks there date back to Tudor times, and they're incredibly deep, cold water, wet docks. Derelict. Yeah. But all you have now is urban fishermen, and for some reason these gigantic carp.
Huge golden fish swimming around in there.
The most odd place, and you do find these kind of forgotten, particularly on the edgelands of London, these forgotten places which are very inspiring. And so it's quite odd when all of a sudden these, you meet probably about 30 to 40 people at a really out the way part of London where nobody would otherwise go. So we create, just for the time when we're doing the event, an attraction. And it's really interesting.
Yeah, I think so. So did you did you start the whole professional storytelling thing by
walking around and thinking, actually, this would make a good story. We should do this, as our job, or how did you start doing that?
No, that wasn't how it. That wasn't really how it started out. What happened was we were just in a situation where we didn't have any money, and because both of us have had really non-traditional careers, we
Those are the
weren't.
best careers.
I
Yeah.
guess you don't have much choice, but we neither of us had much in the way of useful qualifications for kind of getting a job, and we were really just very confused about what we could do. But we did have these kind of artistic, both of us, very creative, very artistic and stuff like that, and normally that just kind of sits in your life and you don't earn money from it. But we were inspired by certain members of our family who had gone on to kind of have artistic careers, that if you approach it in the right way, in a kind of business-like way, you can actually use your skills as a lever to earn money. And at that point we were just so desperate, we thought, well, we've got to do something, so let's see if we can earn money from storytelling and music in this kind of a way.
Yeah.
And we discovered that we could. And so it really came very much from a kind of financial imperative, and then went on to be something that we found that we couldn't live without, whether or not we needed the money. As it happens, we still do need the money, but there are other things that we could do now, but we still choose to carry on doing these London Dreamtime events on a regular basis because they're so magical and fulfilling.
Yeah, right. Yes, and as one can see on your website, and basically if we look you up on the internet, we can see that you're very successful in what you do. And of course, I'm going to put a link to the website into the description of the talk. And yeah, so you've worked with and for so many institutions and people, and you performed in corners of London and in museums, theaters, churches. You do a lot of work with children. So can you give us a bit of an overview with whom you have worked with already, if that's possible?
Yes. So George and I do London Dreamtime together, but storytelling as a sort of medium is my thing. And George also, as well as his music, which is like the 90% of what you do.
Yeah, I'll do early years storytelling in locations. So for some reason, unbeknownst to me, I'm very talented at working with early years sensory up to around about the age of 8 or so storytelling. So I will do storytelling in places like, for example, the London Eye. I've told stories in the crypt of St Paul's Cathedral, and in various museums. But Vanessa tends to, because Vanessa has such a larger range of storytelling, so Vanessa can do all ages of storytelling. It's basically your total skill set.
Yeah,
that's where you find yourself in all of the museums and
it's very wonderful, because quite often I'll get a paid job. For example, the V&A, the Victoria and Albert Museum, commissioned me to create a story about Gabrielle Enthoven, who you won't probably have heard of, and I certainly hadn't heard of, and no one who comes to the V&A has ever heard of. She was a theatrical archivist. So not, you would think, perhaps the typical subject for an early years children's interactive storytelling session. However, we made it very silly and fun, and there was a lot of dressing up and things like that. And because I was able to take that story to other places where people needed to know about, I don't know, women whose story hadn't been heard before, or Victorians, or where they basically just wanted something really fun. It connects with pantomime and things like that. So I would work with, I've worked with all kinds of museums, every kind of museum, and in pretty much every story related capacity. Worked with businesses, do a lot of corporate work, things like Johnson & Johnson. If they want Lloyd's Bank, if they want to have a kind of Halloween celebration, they might go, let's have a storyteller in our offices for 150 of our staff. And that's for people who perhaps they're not really into the arts and they don't really, they'd never think of going, they're not literary and they wouldn't want to go to storytelling, but they still want to hear a story around Broadgate and or Aldgate, where their offices are, and they want to hear a sort of spooky story about that. And that's where all the kind of research that I do, all kinds of feeds into itself. The London Dreamtime events feed into the corporate events, the museum events feed into the schools events, and the schools, great practice for strange and wonderful stories. Kids love listening to just about anything. So it becomes very, very organic.
Yeah.
And very wide ranging, which is just what I love about it, really, the variety.
I would say the South East London Folklore Society, that helps. I run a monthly folklore society where I quite often do the research for the talks, but sometimes and we get other people to come in, and that's inspired a lot of location-based stuff, particularly Dr. D.
Oh.
Yeah, that's right. So George is really interested in folklore, and he has run for about 10 years, isn't it?
It's about 10 to 12 years. Yeah.
A monthly meetup in the top room of a pub where people will come, they'll perhaps listen to a speaker, discuss strange aspects of folklore, like there might be a talk about mermaids, or there might be a talk about London's necropolises or something like that.
Yeah.
And we've been doing it over Zoom as well, haven't we?
Yeah.
And it's amazing what kinds of things that turns up in the way of material. I've come and I've told stories there when it's relevant and stuff like that. So that all feeds into it too.
Great, yeah. Next time it's possible, I'm gonna join you. I'm gonna come to the meeting if I'm allowed.
Oh yeah, of course you can.
Yes!
Totally. Well, nowadays it's amazing.
It's so easy.
If you want to find out about the Folklore Society, go to. I can send you a link to the Cunning Folk. That's what I run, the Eventbrite, so that you can see all of the online events which kind of run in tandem with London Dreamtime. Vanessa tends to co-list them as well.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Please do. I'm interested. So, but I just thought when you said, George, that you mainly work or you more work with children more, or with people under 5. Yeah, basically. So, but I sometimes believe that no matter the age, people react the same way. Adults can become children again when listening to a good story. So is there really a big difference in when you have a good story, when you come to the audience? When it comes to
as somebody who spends a lot of time watching, when we're doing the London Dreamtime shows and seeing Vanessa. Vanessa is able to do the adult stuff, which tends to have a little bit more nuance to it. Mm-hmm. It's surprising how much nuance you can do, even with very, very early years. How much you can leave unsaid in a story and let the audience draw their own conclusions. I mean, certainly when you from about 4 years on, you can be more complicated. And deal with more challenging themes than people would necessarily think, and that's really good. It's a question of when you get before that, you have to more concentrate on sensation and joining in.
And some music and actions and things like that, because they can't understand words.
Yeah, so I've been doing stuff with Royal Parks where we work with. There's a project called Mission Invertebrate, which is about raising awareness of insects and worms and snails in the Royal Parks. It's incredibly good fun, and that's a really interesting project to co-devise the early years stuff for specific parks. So that's good fun.
Yeah.
I think one of the big differences with younger children and with adults is that I think it is very important to be very, very gentle and with young children. And that's why George is very good, because in his heart, he's a very gentle person, I think. And so I think that, people can sense that when he's there, that they don't have to worry, that they don't have to be scared. There's not going to be a sad ending. Nothing bad's going to happen. Everything's happy. Everything's safe. And I think that, actually a lot of people want that even as adults. but also as adults, you kind of want to venture into strange, deviant, confusing, contradictory, possibly scary. Like there's a big demand for the kind of scary stories and things like that. Early years really don't like that.
I mean, that's interesting because you're very good with ghost stories and dark stories, whilst I can deliver a folklore talk on kind of dark lore, or let's say, you know, demonology or witchcraft or something like that. But actually telling the tale, I find quite difficult. I think because I'm well, you're simply way better at the more challenging themes.
Yeah. But I can imagine that that there's a huge demand for the scary stories and the scary places and things like that. What's the weirdest place you ever told a story at when you perform outside, maybe?
Oh, I would say off the top of my head, the roof of the evicted Highgate estate.
Yeah.
So the Highgate estate was a 1970s failed experiment in southeast London. It was a absolutely monumental, enormous, monolithic, brutalist piece of architecture, just massive, really massive. And one of the things that it had in the center of this kind of block was a load of really beautiful trees, and they could have tried to make it a bit like the Barbican, and they could have invested in it and made it really nice, but instead what the authorities chose to do was evict it, knock it down, and build something new. The problem was that people didn't want to be evicted because they knew that they were going to be sent away from their communities and probably never come to live back in such a beautiful place. And so they clung on really tightly to the blocks, even though they were ugly and they'd been, you know, drained of resources and all the rest of it, because that was where their communities were, that was where their homes were, that was where their jobs and lives were. And in the end, the authorities basically just forced everybody out by hook or by crook in a really awful way. Until there was just one person left in this entire thousands and thousands of homes, one person left. And because this one person was left in his flat, they couldn't turn off the electricity and they couldn't knock it down.
It was a deserted council estate, about 500 square meters. So 500 by 500 by 500, and it had
walkways, weird twisty corridors. I mean, it was, and lots of the houses were almost as they had been, with people just like walking out, and they did use it as film locations for all kinds of things, and people used to go and shoot their pop videos there, and they all did graffiti there, and they kept chickens. They had enormous chicken coop in there, like a gorilla chicken coop. They had gorilla gardeners in there doing all kinds of things. Great. But people generally wouldn't go there because it felt transgressive and scary, and everyone was kind of a bit scared that there might be, I don't know, violence there or something like that. So people did tend to avoid it as well. Yeah. And we thought, let's do some storytelling there, which we ended up doing several times. But I think the most beautiful time was just before it got knocked down. We found a way of getting onto the roof of one of the buildings, and the views were wonderful. The journey onto the roof was just incredible because you had to go through all of these things. It was so popular. We were turning people away. I mean, I've never been so overwhelmed with people trying to book on. And we went up there and we told like scary myths about darkness, and the darkness kind of came on us from all the different corners.
I sang an Aleister Crowley poem.
He sang an Aleister Crowley poem. Aleister Crowley is a Satanist, so he sang an Aleister Crowley poem up there, and that was pretty weird. But we've done some really weird
I'd just
things.
like to clarify, Aleister Crowley wasn't a Satanist.
Oh, sorry.
He founded the religion of Thelema.
Oh, sorry.
But let's just continue.
But I made this mistake too once, and someone corrected me, and I was
right.
Yeah. Always important to correct.
Yeah, I understand that. So I read that you also worked, I think Vanessa, you also worked with Stephen Coates on the story of the Brompton Cemetery Time Machine.
That was brilliant. So Stephen Coates, and us, we go way back. And actually, one of our very first events, we had a come and tell your true life story thing on Hampstead Heath, and he came along to it. And at that time, so this is a really long time ago, and at that time, I had no idea who he was or anything. And he said, "Oh, I'd like to tell a true story at the end. Is it all right if I stand up and tell a true story?" So he kind of told the story about how he became the Clerkenwell Kid and all kind, and went in the sewers, and it was a wonderful story. And we've kind of always been friends ever since. And then I read his blog about the Brompton Cemetery, so-called Time Machine, which is this tomb of Hannah Courtoy, which is, as you probably know, rumoured to be a time machine. And in it, Stephen Coates suggested that it was in fact a teleportation device, which could teleport you perhaps in time, but in space. And the idea was that it linked up with other similar tombs in the other magnificent 7 cemeteries, which is, I was just blown away. So I contacted him. I said, I've got to tell the story of this. Can I, is it all right? Can I get permission to use your idea? And he was like, yeah, of course you can. And then he arranged for us to get into Brompton Cemetery at night and tell it, like he was there and I was there and you were there, weren't you? George was there, and we brought people in. I mean, it was truly brilliant. I just think his ideas are out of this world.
Well, the London Month of the Dead, which he organises, with who else?
And Suzette Field.
With Suzette Field, that is amazing. That's a really good season event.
Right, yeah. But did you try to teleport yourself to one of the other magnificent 7?
I'm afraid I'm not at liberty to divulge that, unfortunately.
Yeah, okay, and I understand that. Yeah, but of course I like this story because you know, as I said before the introduction, my topic is basically London beyond time and place. So I thought, oh, this is brilliant, a time machine that not only a time but maybe just teleport you through space. So yeah.
Could I say, apropos of that we've also done some really interesting collaborations with an organisation called Portals of London. You are aware of them, of course, and we've done 2 joint events, including our first ever digital event. Our first virtual event was talking about the Barbican and the strange time-space slips around the Barbican. So you can walk in one doorway and then you've literally no idea where you're going to end up, because it just takes you to all different places. And we also did one with them in Abney Park Cemetery, which was really, really good.
Yeah.
So it's one of the privileges of what we do, is getting the opportunity to kind of collaborate with brilliant, innovative people.
Yeah, that's really great. I understand that. So what was the scariest story, or what is the scariest story that you know that you told?
That I've told. Well, I think weirdly enough, so I've got this one story about a babysitter, which seems to, for some reason, absolutely terrify people when I say, even quite a lot of adults. However, the worst I got asked to do a story for a masked Halloween ball about a seance, and I did a story about Harry Houdini's famous seance, and I ended it up with like spraying silly string over people as if it was ectoplasm. So people seem to, as they got more and more drunk, people seem to get more and more scared of that particular story. But actually, the biggest reaction that I've ever had to a scary story was when we were doing an adults event at the Cutty Sark, which is this beautiful big ship in Greenwich, and a storyteller called Olivia Armstrong, very lovely and brilliant storyteller, invited us to come and guest with her. And it was kind of dark river and sort of dark tales of the Thames, and I kind of slightly misjudged the story. It was a premiere of a story that I'd never told before about Greenwich, about the Cutty, about that particular area, and I just didn't really get it right, and I made it a lot scarier or darker than I think I'd intended to. And because I made it more scary than I meant to, I didn't do what I would normally do, which is to flag up these are going to be dark stories. So people weren't really expecting it. I think they were kind of expecting folktale that might include death in it, or, you know, something like that.
Yeah.
And this was, again, it was about a Ouija board, and like a kind of haunted Ouija board story in the foot tunnel. And at the end of the event, I was really upset because this one woman had gone running out and had to be comforted by her friends, which I would, and everyone was kind of like really throughout the story, and like kind of hiding their eyes and things like that. And at the end of it, nobody came up to me and said, "Oh, we really enjoyed your storytelling," or anything like that. And I was like, "Oh my God, what have I done?" And I think it wasn't that the story itself was so terrifying. It's just that it wasn't quite appropriately enough, because it was a brand new story. I hadn't really road tested it enough to know what the effect was going to be like. And so I just not quite let people know what to expect.
I enjoyed it. It was brilliant.
Yeah.
I think your Highgate Vampire tale.
Oh yeah, the Highgate Vampire story.
That's off the chart.
Yeah.
Because it's true.
Yeah.
And I just love when you actually go to the location where it's supposed to have occurred. One of our first dates, we broke into Highgate Cemetery.
Right.
And we both independently of each other believed the other person to possibly be a vampire, and got really scared.
I was so scared. I don't normally get scared in cemeteries after dark, because, you know, there's nothing to be scared of really. But and I wasn't expecting to be scared. It was all just a big joke. And then suddenly I got so scared, and we had to leave, didn't we?
Yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't fun. It wasn't like a sort of fun, oh ho ho, isn't this scary kind of thing. It was like a mortal dread, I have to get out of here right now kind of thing. I do think Highgate Cemetery, West Cemetery, is
the one with the big catacombs.
Possibly got some occult issues. I really do. Maybe because of all the strange kind of rituals and things that happened there in the 60s. I do actually wonder if
there were actual Satanists there.
Yeah,
so
I mean actual Satanists.
That was pretty heavy.
Yeah, and they did some pretty heavy stuff there. And I actually think I do wonder if it hasn't just had a bit of a knock-on effect on the whole place.
Maybe, yeah. It's not really peaceful anymore. That's right.
It really isn't. It really isn't.
No.
It's not really a very happy place, actually.
No. Yeah.
In comparison to other places, like
Nunhead's
amazing cemetery. It's just, and Abney Park as well.
Kensal
It's got
Green.
a lovely vibe to it. Kensal Green is really interesting. It has an interesting feel to it.
Yeah, but no, I'm not really a fan of Highgate West Cemetery.
Yeah.
Anyway.
We have to look out for the Highgate Vampire if we ever visits the cemetery. So, in general, what is so important about stories and storytelling?
Well, we are storytelling creatures in that we make sense of our lives by turning them into narratives and stories. There's been research done that has shown that if people have experienced something traumatic, let's say, I don't know, they were attacked, or let's say they were a refugee and they've had to flee somewhere or something like that, that if they aren't able to put their experiences into a narrative and tell them to somebody, then they will be more unhappy and suffer. But if they are able to find a way of putting their experiences into stories, then they're able to deal with it. There's also been research done that show that when people hear stories, they actually have feelings similar to the feelings that someone would have when they were actually experiencing those things, not just listening to it. And also that things like people's audience, if they're all together, they're like their breath and their heartbeats and things can synchronize when they're all listening to a story together. And so I think that stories are the kind of the sort of building block through which we make sense of the world that we live in, which means that storytelling is obviously very, very powerful, but it also means that as storytellers, we have a huge, vast responsibility, because you cannot overestimate the power of a good story, whether or not it carries a message that you perhaps agree with. So storytelling is no more good or bad than a hammer is good or bad. it's simply an incredibly powerful tool.
Yeah, yeah, yes, I agree. And I think it's also interesting that, you can have one story, but when it's told by different people with maybe different backgrounds,
Yeah,
it can be so different, totally different.
so different, entirely different. Yeah,
we
that's
tell
right.
the same story in completely different ways.
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely. And then you can get someone who perhaps comes from, maybe they have views that you disagree with, and they tell the same story, and you're like, oh, I hate that story. And then, someone who you agree with tells the story, and you're like, yes, that's exactly what I love that story.
Yeah, yeah.
And often it's whether the story kind of chimes with your feelings about what the world is really like.
Right, yeah. And it also has an impact on how we maybe perceive history, because it depends on who tells a story or the history of a place. And
Oh yeah, oh, massively.
I certainly
entirely
find that with research. I gave a talk on Malleus Maleficarum, German book, and I had to get the right translation, because the original translation I had the prejudice of the translator overlaid with the values of the age. So I had to go to a different translation, and it's incredibly important.
Right, yeah.
It's full of stories, that book.
Oh, it's very good. You've taken a few from there.
Yeah, I've taken a few from there.
Yeah, great. So which area of London has the best stories? Can you answer this question? Is it
Southeast London?
Yeah.
I reckon. Though actually, around East London and Wapping, so near from like the sort of city going out towards Wapping and Spitalfields, around there are some really amazing stories there.
I think the thing is, though, is whenever you go, I mean, you've been in London all your life. I've been in London for 25, maybe 30, well, coming up to 30 years now. And when you spend an amount of time in a particular corner, it just comes to life, particularly when you put down roots.
Yeah.
But there are tales all over the place. So, like, for example, you go to Hammersmith and you don't think there's anything there.
Mm.
And then there's the Hammersmith ghost, which is amazing.
There's actually,
and
loads of stories in Hammersmith.
And it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
I think that's the funny thing with London, is just because so much of it has been built over again and again and again, so you don't know which bits are old or new. It's all old.
Yeah.
But somehow I was expecting that it was maybe Wapping, Spitalfields, the East End, and there's this part of the East End. I was expecting.
It does have. I mean, I do think it does have more than its fair share, and I think part of it is that they've been. I think part of it is because it's a sort of dock area, so you get people from all around the world. I think part of it is because it's so near the city, so lots of things have kind of happened that are connected with the city of London itself. But I do kind of agree. And then there's all the things connected with kind of the Match Girl strike. Jack the Ripper has got like its entire centre there. I'm not a big fan of the Jack the Ripper stories, but they've spawned many other kind of researches, and I think people have pulled things up in a way that perhaps they haven't.
Then you have Shadrach.
Yeah, then you've got Shadrach and his. I mean, there are a lot of stories there. Shadrach's Exotic Animal Emporium, and just so many more. But that's to do with the docks again. So. I do. But having lived in Southeast London for such a long time now, and done such a lot of research here, I do feel that it's very blessed with amazing stories, in the way that perhaps if you go out to somewhere like Dulwich or something like that, as you go out maybe towards Croydon, I mean, there are still stories there, but not in the same kind of thickness as there are in Wapping.
Yeah. But that's interesting, because I'm not from London, and when I was I don't know, 16 or something like that, I was always into English literature, history, culture, and things like that. But of course, Jack the Ripper was also one of the things that kind of got me interested into the whole history and symbolism thing, if you like. But what I found really interesting when I was in London for the first time, and it has been ever since. I somehow feel connected to this area, to Spitalfields, Wapping. I don't know why. If I sometimes you have a feeling towards a certain place, and you can't explain why. And every time I went to London, I was like, this is the area where I feel most drawn to, where I feel most home, if you like, which is interesting, because I often wonder why that is, why people feel drawn to certain places. But maybe also because of stories that are your own personal story, maybe, and it fits the story of a place.
There's that architecture around Spitalfields as well, with Brick Lane and that beautiful church. I mean, the church in Spitalfields is one of the finest Hawksmoor churches, and there's the Ackroyd book about Hawksmoor, which is very good.
The fact that so many, it's been a home for immigrants, I think that makes it, for so many generations. I think that's one of the other things that makes it a sort of interesting and vibrant place.
That's particularly when you think of Brick Lane and the transformations over the centuries there.
It's just interesting, you know. I walked with a friend through Notting Hill, and she said, "Oh, this is so, I don't know, this is so beautiful. I could live here." And I thought, yes, it's nice, but I don't feel anything here. You know, it's just so personal how you perceive a place. I recently had a discussion with one of my guests, Frank Malloy. He's also a tour guide and a writer. And we talked about, we had this question, if words or objects have more durability, and we didn't really come to a conclusion. But what do you think, as storytellers and people who deal with stories? It's a really difficult question. I don't know if there is an answer, but it was really something that we both found very interesting.
I'm going to go with words, probably because I'm biased towards storytelling, but I think that stories have such durability that, for example, the last story that I did for London Dreamtime, our online event, was The Smith and the Devil, and that story has been traced back. They've traced it back via kind of linguistic studies to show that it dates from the Bronze Age. So it is a really, really old story, and lots of these kind of traditional stories like Jack and the Beanstalk and Sleeping Beauty and stuff like that, Cinderella, are not hundreds of years old, but thousands of years old, and told in different versions across the whole world. So, you know, there's the Native American version of Cinderella, there's a Indian version of Cinderella, there's a Japanese version of Cinderella, and they've kind of almost grown up independently. And I think that's because they have they express something very somehow fundamental that we can't pin down about what it means to be human and to live in the world with its physical, the physical world of kind of beds and metal and water and stuff like that. They're not myths, they're folk tales. It's incredible.
Yeah, that's right. So we go with words.
Yeah, we do.
I would agree. George, what do you think?
Well, I think the thing is that all objects ultimately vanish. I mean, we're coming to a time now where people are already worried about information on obsolete storage systems. 3.5-inch floppy disks or mini disks and stuff like that. And software has gone to a point now where the only way that you can attempt to keep the information is in a hard copy. But interestingly, paper decays. You actually are better off with the manuscript than the paper. That's actually preserved longer. So, but it all disappears in the end. I immediately, when you said that, the first thought which came to my head was London Stone, which is just by Cannon Street Station, where they've still got the sword marks from Jack Cade's rebellion when he hit it and said, "I'm the mayor of London now," before they all got drunk. But but that's even now it's in it. It used to be in a really rubbish container, and actually, just in the last couple of years, they've actually made a really nice place for it. But even so, the London Stone gets passed by more people, and I think that it's probably more important to people who are told the story of Jack Cade's rebellion
the story,
than
the
actual stone itself. It's only if you've heard the story that it has a significance.
Yeah.
So yeah, words.
That's a good example. I will remember that if I ever have this discussion again. Thank you, George. No, it really is. But yeah, that's the thing. That's this is a good example. So George, I know we already said that you also do your own music and you accompany some of your events with your music. But can you tell us a bit about what else you do? Do you put out?
I go under the name of Cunning Folk, which you can look up on the internet and also on like Spotify and Deezer and all of the different things. And I've released about 3 or 4 albums as Cunning Folk, where I started off doing site-specific London songs, actually. So songs about the Crossbones burial ground, songs about the legend of One-Eye Grey, all sorts of particular things like that. And then I found myself very much interested in magical traditions. So a lot of my more recent stuff is about London witch trials and but also British magical practices and stuff. So I and that kind of works well with the fact that I run like online rituals with the Wheel of the Year, which is something I do, and the Folklore Society I run. So they all kind of work together. In between, there's the phone going over there. Sorry. So that's kind of what my practice is in between. Being a session player, so I play for different bands. Including there's a UK band called Stick in the Wheel who are doing very well, folk band, and I'm their bass player now, so that's good.
Great.
Mostly working within folk music. That said, I've started about 5 or 6 years ago. I was signed making music for a Norwegian called Prince Thomas, and started making abstract electronic dance music again. I'm very influenced by bands like Can, Cluster, and Neu. I'm really into Rodelius at the moment, actually, and I think there's a Berlin pianist called Arnold Cassar. He's very good. Well worth if you like abstract music, and if you like modern classical.
Sometimes too, yes. Okay. Yeah, I will check him out. Great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So both of you, would you encourage others to do what you do?
I would say we all have our unique path. Looking for things which interest and stimulate you, always being inquisitive, always have 2 or 3 books on the go. Look for ways to nourish yourself as a creative, and if that means that your path is as a creative, then do it. Location is a great inspiration, and finding the stories which just lie beneath your city streets will take you to amazing and interesting places, no matter where you are.
That's right. Vanessa?
What he said.
Okay, great. So what you just again mentioned the locations and the places. So has dealing with London and its stories and history, has it also maybe changed your view of the city?
Yes, so I can say most definitely that it has. So I've always been a great walker in London ever since I was 11, and I used to bunk off school. So I didn't really go to school very much for the first few years of secondary school, and instead I used to kind of just walk, and it made me feel connected with the streets. But there's nothing so enriching of your kind of walking and looking around than when you know the stories, you've researched the stories, and also looking at places and going, oh, I remember when I told the story of such and such up there, or I remember in the park when we did this, that and the other. Do you know what I mean? So that enriches it. But I think, knowing what the stories are, knowing what things mean, and knowing what you've already imagined them to be as well. So, you know, walking in the Barbican, as well as kind of knowing about the history of the Barbican, I also know about the stories that I thought of and that we thought of with Portals of London, where we were thinking about, you know, slips in time and space and where we thought they might be and where we thought they might lead to. And that's very enriching too.
Yeah.
So, my God, just transformative of my relationship with London.
Yeah, a creative relationship with the landscape is amazing. Something which was very formative for me was there's a book of Lost Rivers of London, where you could actually walk the routes of forgotten rivers like the Fleet or the Walbrook or the Effra, and actually just walking down city streets, but knowing that occasionally you'd come to a drain and you could hear the course of the river. It made you, it transported you back in time. And you started to see that, and certainly the fact that we're both always looking for locations means that when you go on a wander, there's a sense of being inquisitive. You'll see a blue plaque up there, and after you've realised that it's commemorating another. Sometimes it's actually somebody who's interesting. Quite often they're not, but you know, like for example, the one on Aldwych Tube on the Strand is for William Lilly, who was a 17th century Puritan Protestant who also happened to be a pioneer of astrology. So you just find yourself going, oh, well, I need to find out more about this guy. How, you know, and then you find out that William Lilly attempted to break King Charles I out of prison. Literally with a file in a cake. And then all of a sudden you find that the stories come from there. But I think being inquisitive about looking for nooks and crannies, the places which people wouldn't necessarily see. And that goes into your artistic practice, really. You look for the hidden things.
Yeah, that's the thing. But I agree. I think, or I always say that I think the best way to get to know London, to perceive London, maybe to understand London, is walking and literature, or walking and stories in when we deal with that. So I think walking is very important, because this is the best way to really see and experience the whole place. But if you know the stories, that's even better, because otherwise you just walk and you don't really appreciate maybe.
I found reading Arthur Machen stories of London. I'm not sure they're familiar with Arthur Machen. That's been very, very good. And actually, the British Library's been releasing collections of short stories based on London. I've probably got one over there, but I can't reach. But you do find the different ones. It was by Eliza Durnley. Let's see if I can find it.
I have it over here. I have it
into the London fog.
He's got
it. Right. Yeah.
The other thing is
I have this also over here, but I haven't read it yet.
I've done a couple of events with a woman called Syra Niazi, who is a renegade guide who you know, of course.
I do know, not in person, but we exchanged emails.
And she has a really unique way of kind of looking at the world, I mean, I think she's strong in so many fields, but one of her particular strengths is kind of people's stories. And so she tends to look at kind of modern histories from people's lives, and they are so interesting, and working with her was just brilliant, because you know, she took me to lots of places that I'd walked past dozens of times, and kind of there'd been a bit of me that had just thought, oh, this isn't for me, I won't look in here, oh, this isn't, you know, for me, I won't go into this shop or whatever. And she's the kind of person that whatever it is, she'll go, oh yeah, I don't care whether it's for me or not, I'm going to go in anyway. And that just takes you on an entirely new way of looking at, and it's still through stories, but it's an entirely new way of looking at the city.
Right. When you tell the story of aspects of the American Werewolf in London, now that was amazing, because a lot of it's one of my favorite films. But what we did there was Vanessa was telling stories of the production aspects of the film, and taking us to specific locations in central London, and I would talk about werewolf lore, because I know quite a lot about that. that was a really interesting way to engage through film location, and that was really interesting.
Yeah, we talked about the making of the film, which was actually got some really interesting tales to it, as well as talking about so bringing in the different aspects. And actually, I used to work in the film industry, so I'm very interested in kind of film production and what happens when you shoot and make a film. So and that was an entirely new departure for us. We'd never done anything about kind of making films before, and it was really successful, wasn't it?
It really
We're
was.
definitely, once we get the chance to go out again, we'll be doing that in person. But also we did record it, didn't we? So people can buy the tour if they're in the West End. They can buy it and they can download it and they can listen to it on headphones and walk around that way. So people can if they want. I don't think I've got a ticket link for it anymore.
I do like. I actually, that's a real favourite game of ours, is to watch old films and try and work out exactly where the locations are.
Yeah.
And you can often find that, and sometimes really bad films have great kind of almost documentary style location work of the time. So there's a really terrible movie called The Pinch, which stars Stacey Keach and Freddie Starr, and it has no redeeming features to it, apart from it has one shot which goes past the Westway and 1970s Notting Hill, and you get a real sense of what it was like at that time.
Oh yeah,
that was amazing.
Yes,
that's really good.
Yeah,
and actually, Long Good Friday is excellent for South East London. That's got some really good location work for South East London.
Okay, so I'm gonna watch that.
Yeah,
I will. Yes, but I also George, I also did once. I followed the fleet. Basically, I started in Hampstead on Hampstead Heath.
Oh yes,
and I walked down to Blackfriars Bridge, and it was an interesting walk, because if you know the story and you know there's this hidden river.
That's the thing, when you have a good guide through it, and particularly when you realise that some of the aspects close to Fleet Street were designed to be like a canal, to be inspired by Venice. But the problem with a lot of London rivers is that they weren't the cleanest of rivers in the world. So well, maybe they were more accurately emulating Venice than they necessarily would have liked, but it was, well, actually, that really does Venice a disservice, because
I read that some monks in Whitefriars actually died from the fumes.
Yeah.
So
okay, that sounds about right.
Yeah. So it's pretty revolting.
Yeah. So what are the next upcoming projects for the both of you?
Right. So I've got two strands to what I'm doing. Number one, I'm looking to curate more, so to create projects that allow me to make opportunities for other storytellers. There are so many brilliant storytellers out there that I want to be able to share their work and their stories. So that's one. And then the other thing is I want to find new technical ways to bring our live events, when we go back to doing them. I want to find ways of bringing them to people that aren't simply someone standing in a corner with a camera filming it. I want to find a way of bringing it to life for people who are in other countries or in other parts of the country, so that they can really experience the adventure of going to these places and feeling like they're there. And I think that somewhere in this idea it's going to be about tapping into the imagination, because that's the strongest of all of our senses in a way. If we can only tap into people's imagination, then they really will feel like they're there with us. So we're dying to get back to real life events, and as soon as we can, we will. But I don't want to abandon what we've done with virtual events either.
Yeah, I mean, with our live events, I'm looking at upping the upping the musical game several ways. I mean, our last gig before lockdown, we played at the Union Chapel, and that was really excellent.
Oh,
Where
it was
we
amazing. You had a full band.
where I had full band and stuff like that. But I'm also looking at when we're doing our slightly more informal events, really upping the production value. Just just even when it's just the two of us, and I can see how we can do that now. So I'm excited about that. Personally speaking, because I've started working on live streaming. I'm going to keep my live streaming going, which I really enjoy. I've got there's a lot of folklore which I'm working on at the moment, and also quite a lot of early modern witchcraft history. So I'm going to be giving talks on mostly British, but I've got a feeling that I'm going to be re-researching Malleus Maleficarum to give a talk in the autumn about that. Great. Because it's one of the key books. There's another book by Nida called the Anthill, which is worth doing. So yeah, I'll be keeping it topical by doing a lot of work based in the 15th, 16th, and 17th centuries. Yeah. There you go.
Great. Yeah. Are there still topics or places in London you want to research and find stories about, or did you cover the whole thing already?
So much. I think I'm interested in West London, so the area around Richmond and particularly the river, and then also North East London, so around Walthamstow and those kinds of places. Northwest London. I think there's so much more to uncover once we're able to start traveling, because this year we've been very limited to places that we can walk to from Peckham, and I want to sprawl out across London. So many places.
I'm researching on a Spitalfields figure, actually, Culpepper the herbalist. So I'll be doing some more research from that. And what happens is quite often when I do in-depth research on a particular person for a folklore talk, it inspires you to give a story. I mean, we found that when we had
Dr. D.
Yeah, and what was the guy who had his synagogue on London Bridge? Helm.
No, Cunning Folk.
Cunning Folk, yeah. So quite often, particularly when I'm researching London-based occult matters, you'll find that things will work on. So yeah, when I do some research on the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, that will give some more location stuff. And you do find that because there's quite so much, so many interesting people to research for slightly more folkloric talks, that will kind of wend its way into story.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I had one talk with a friend of mine, Robert Kingham of Minimum Labyrinth. I don't know if you know him also, and he did a documentary about pagan London like 2 or 3 years ago.
He came and gave a talk at the South East London Folklore Society about that. Yeah, I like Robert a great deal. He does some very interesting things. He did something about the UFO sightings out in the east of England as well, which is very, very good.
Right. Yeah, I just thought. Sorry.
His interaction with London, particularly ancient pagan history, is very, very good.
Yes.
And those particular videos were excellent. I think he talked about the Dagenham. The Dagenham figure, which is fascinating. I'd like to go and see that when I'm allowed.
Yes, yes, me too. But yeah, I just thought that you would fit to what you do. So yeah, and
yeah, he's a good guy. We've got his book Baroque London.
Oh, that's a really good book.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and I had another talk with Stephen Sarley. He wrote a comic, or he wrote a story for a comic, Dark Lines of London, which is about Dr. D and the School of Night. And he kind of discovered a ley line that goes from Mile End to Blackheath and through the Greenwich Foot Tunnel, basically. So maybe that could be interesting for you.
Wow, that sounds interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I thought, well, with regards to ley lines and stuff like that, I think that From Hell is very good for that. It's an excellent reimagining.
Yeah.
And what's quite interesting, because I come from the town in Dorset, where Alan Moore has one of the protagonists buried there. It's interesting to see quite how well that particular part was researched as well. It's very good indeed.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite books ever. One of my favorite literary books. Yeah, and once I did basically I did the pentagram. I walked all the.
Oh, you did it? Yeah.
Oh yeah, one day from morning till night. I had to take I took the bus when they took the coach, because I couldn't take a coach. But then one or two times I had to take the tube, because it was basically impossible to get from A to B.
Yeah.
Just walking without, I couldn't have done it in one day. But that was fascinating, and I felt like a complete lunatic. I thought if people knew what I was doing,
those kind of psychogeographic rambles can be very good. There's the guy who managed the Echo and the Bunnyman, and then Bill Drummond. He wrote a book about whenever he visits a city, he writes a word on the map and then follows the route of the word. Which I think is just a really fun way of engaging with a place. And
that's right.
You've got these YouTubers nowadays who draw straight lines on the map and then document themselves just crossing vast distances on an entirely straight line. And I really think that's fun. I think that's great.
Yeah, that is fun. So, final question: what is your favorite place in London? And do you have a favorite place in London?
I really like Temple. I think that it's such a peculiar church. It's like one of those places where you come around the corner and you just discover this really strange place.
That's right.
I have a favourite place. It is just along Tottenham Court Road. There's a little square which has got, and the side of the building's got a great big mural on it, which has been since the 1980s. And the square itself is very kind of deserted, and people for many years they wouldn't go and sit there. And the rumor was that it was kind of built over a plague pit, and that's why everybody, even the birds, kind of wouldn't go there or anything like that. And it's along Tottenham Street. So Tottenham Street comes off Tottenham Court Road, and on the corner of that street is a little tiny toy museum, the most cracked, broken, scary, weird, twisted Victorian toy museum called Pollock's Toy Museum. And that particular corner, I was on my route when I used to bunk off school, and I used to go down to Covent Garden and watch the street entertainers. I always walk past that, and I would look kind of longingly at that particular little corner, particularly the mural, and just feel that, some kind of wonderful grown-up me would live in one of these little houses across the thing. And then by some absolutely extraordinary chance, I found a room to rent when I had just left home. I found a room to rent that was very, very cheap, just over one of the sandwich bars there. And so I moved in. Great. And I actually ended up, which never happens, does it, kind of living in my dream location for about 5 years.
Yeah. Wow.
And living above this little shop, next to this mural, next to this thing, next to Tottenham Court Road, right on the corner where the toy museum was. So I've got to say that's my favourite place in the world.
There used to be an internet cafe there.
Oh, an internet cafe.
It was called Siberia.
Siberia.
I love the names of these forgotten shops.
Yeah. One should collect them before.
Oh, yeah.
But that's a great story also. So really, really good. Yeah. So thank you very much, Vanessa. Thank you very much, George, for this wonderful conversation. As I said, I will put a link to the websites and everything that you mentioned into the talk's description. So I wish you all the best for what's coming next, and I hope to see you in real life once.
That'd be wonderful.
That'd be great.
Yeah, it would really. And yes, as I said, thank you very much, Vanessa and George, for your time.